What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of A Grown Man's Diary. I'm your host, Bradley. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I am so thrilled for today's episode because not only is it our first ever interview episode, but it's also an episode that is specifically dedicated to Black History Month and focusing on mental health within the Black community. And I am thrilled that my first ever interview guest is my very good friend, my brother from another mother, Christopher Pipkin, or as some of you LA group fitness people may know him as, Chris P. Chris is a successful actor, entrepreneur, as well as fitness instructor here in LA, and he just has this ability to light up every room that he enters and has this natural high energy and infectious positivity about him. So I needed to sit down with him and really just have an in-depth conversation about how he maintains his positive attitude, what tricks he has, as well as learn a little bit more about his life and upbringing as a young boy of color, that's originally from the East Coast and now is living on the West Coast. So Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I have known each other for a very long time, about over 6 years at this point.
Yes.
And I like to think that we know each other pretty well, but we've also never had this type of conversation before, because it can be a little hard to navigate, especially, as a white guy myself, not really knowing what questions are appropriate to ask necessarily to better understand the perspective that you're growing up in, as well as not knowing really what's okay to say and talk about and so forth. So I would love to just kind of start off for you to just share a little bit about your story with the audience and really just let them kind of get a feel of how you got to sitting here with me today.
Cool. For one, thank you for the intro. That was a great intro.
Of course,
Appreciate
man.
that.
You earned it.
So a couple cliff notes about me. I am born and raised in Philadelphia, not West. I went to a four-year school called Millersville University in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Moved to Los Angeles. I majored in communications and broadcasting. Dropped out. Went to a community college, learned I wanted to be an actor, so I took an acting class there, and that's kind of how I was like, oh, whoa, this is what I like this. And then I started doing better in school once I started taking acting classes.
Because you found your passion.
Because I found my passion, exactly. It was like a revelation that I had. So once I figured that out, I started trying to find acting work in Philadelphia. I met this guy named Derek Metellus, who's one of my great friends to this day, and he was working on a project. He cast me in his project. We filmed it out there, and we just decided that we need to move out to LA. So we fast forward to 2014. I moved here 5 days before my 24th birthday, Los Angeles. My birthday is February 3rd. And yeah, man, it's kind of been a roller coaster since then. And getting to where I am now, I needed to find a job that had autonomy. Because I was a salesman at the time. I was selling mandolin slices at Walmart. That's a whole nother story, but it was... that got me to California, which I'm grateful for.
That's for the next interview.
That's for the next one. Exactly. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. No. So my friend Rashad, he introduced me to his brother's girlfriend at the time, now wife, who was a SoulCycle instructor. He said, you should try a SoulCycle. He introduced me to SoulCycle. And the best thing about SoulCycle was, like I said, I needed a job with autonomy. And you work, you teach multiple people at a time. So I would work 2 to 3 classes in a day, which would leave my days open for auditions, generally like 9 to 5. So I started balancing auditions and SoulCycle, and been doing that since like 2015 to now, and it's been really cool. Been some highs, been some lows, been some good bookings, been some busy days, been some not so busy days, and it's I'm grateful for it all.
Fantastic. And I mean, you found your passion in acting, and I'll get back to that in a second, but I mean, you've clearly found something in fitness as well, because not only are you good at it, I mean, you love staying active and healthy yourself.
Absolutely.
So you found your passion in acting through that class. What was that moment that clicked with you in fitness that you're like, you know what? Yes, I found this originally as a convenience, scheduling wise, but really led you to kind of stick with it and go through it and stick with it for so many years.
It was really growing up playing sports my entire life. Like we played basketball and football as a kid, and when I in high school, I used to swim, I used to dive, I used to pole vault, and
I did not know that.
Yeah, I used to pole vault.
Okay.
I did karate as a kid, and competing in like national competitions and stuff. So that competitive edge was always there for me. And then and then also all of my friends played football. So when I would train with them, I would like train as if I were training to play football. And so the competitiveness and always moving kind of came from that childhood aspect of mine. And then when I started training for SoulCycle and taking classes, I was like, wow, it was kind of a world, because the boutique fitness scene, from my experience, wasn't really as prominent yet. So when I started taking it, I was just like, wow, this is interesting, and this is different than what I ever thought of, like what you can do for a living.
Yeah, I totally get that because we're both from the East Coast.
Yeah.
You from Philly, me from Connecticut,
Yeah.
and yes, SoulCycle specifically was founded in New York as an
Yeah.
East Coast company, but it was really just a New York City thing. It never really made its. I mean, it did make its way out to the suburbs of my hometown and so forth.
Yeah.
And it's it's in Philly now.
Yeah.
But in the early days, it was a New York City thing, and then it was an LA thing.
Exactly.
And yeah, because I didn't really hear about SoulCycle until I was out in LA, which is ironic.
Yeah, I never knew what it was either prior to.
Yeah.
And but it turned out to be one of the best blessings ever.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's how we met.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Manhattan Beach studio.
Manager Brad. We're going to brunch on Sundays.
There it is. There it is. We had a lot of fun back in the day.
Good times. Good times.
So being a fitness instructor, we'll kind of tap into this for a second.
Okay.
What's your favorite part about being a fitness instructor now? And also what's the biggest challenge that you find?
My favorite thing is, like, when you go to work out and you may not feel like working out before you start, and even once you start, it's like, this is 45 minutes, but after like that 5-10 minute mark, it's literally like a complete switch of that feeling. Those endorphins kick in and you just feel accomplished for showing up for yourself even though you didn't feel like doing it. And I think once I realized that even when I'm tired, I still decide to do something, I became more and more proud of myself, and that helped me push me in all other aspects of my life. So like my mental capacity and mental toughness has grown significantly once I started teaching the way I do. And even with people in class, if they have that same sentiment, they would, like, I could just see afterwards how good they feel from class. Mm-hmm. So for me to be a part of that and that reasoning and to help them feel that way, especially if they were down prior to, it's kind of like one of those feelings you can't even describe. It's cool.
Yeah, I think that's very true, because like for me, in the group fitness setting, whether it's SoulCycle or Barry's or Box Union or anything else, like it's always the personal accomplishment, but there's also something to going through it with other people. And you're all leaving the room feeling as though you went through hell and back together. You're in the bunker together, and that creates that additional bond with those people and the sense of accomplishment and all that.
Absolutely.
And I mean, do you feel, from the instructor's point of view, having never been one myself, do you feel that extra weight on your shoulders every single class, or do you allow yourself to just be just another participant in class?
Yeah, absolutely you do. One example was I taught a class on Mother's Day once, and I remember it was probably one of the greatest classes I've ever taught. Like, everybody was just happy. People were crying in class. People were coming up to me afterwards.
Good tears.
Happy tears. It's just like, just like the release of whatever they were feeling. And but the energy of that day was amazing. And then there's this one girl that came up to me afterwards and said, that was just the best class you ever taught. So then fast forward to a year later, it was Mother's Day again. And that same girl comes up to me and was like, that class you taught last year was my favorite class ever. I hope this one is just as good. And she said that to me before class started. And I just
setting high standards.
Exactly. So I kind of got in my head like, And it was cool. It was a good class. It wasn't,
The best class
it wasn't
ever.
the best class ever.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because like you said, it was the standards were set, and also when you're teaching every day, every class, every week is different. So if you're teaching 15 classes a week sometimes, and somewhat doing the same thing, trying not to give the same speech, or sometimes it can catch up and you feel like, I don't want to say unmotivated, but you feel maybe like you just need a little refresh.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that I feel that shows sometimes.
I mean, that's something that I've always been so curious about because, like, myself, I've auditioned to be a coach, an instructor at SoulCycle, as you know. And, one concern I had going into it, granted I didn't make it, so it was a mute point, but as I was going through the very brief audition period, I always had this voice in my head of, like, this isn't for you because you're not going to be able to be on all the time. Like, I have, just like everybody, good days and bad days, but because of my depression and anxiety, my bad days or, just my average day is not necessarily one that I want to be a performer in. So how do you, when you are having a bad day, how do you kind of flip that switch and get yourself to go out there? And this could also certainly apply to acting as well.
Yeah.
How do you compartmentalize, your real life, and you're going through it, whether it's a relationship issue, a personal issue, a finance issue, it doesn't matter. But you're kind of down in the dumps, and then you got to get in front of X amount of people in the fitness world and perform and put on this huge cheerful face.
Yeah.
And be motivational and inspiring, or get in front of a panel of judges, if you will, and try to land a solid role.
Short answer, I would say I don't, but I used to. So one thing I noticed about myself, especially with teaching classes or anything that I do, is that when I try to be anything but myself, I attract people that I don't want to be around. So when let's say if I'm in a negative space, let's call it. It's not that I would go up there and be like, my life sucks, this just happened. But I would go up there and be like, look, man, we about to get it done today. Because that's the mood I'm in. Like, however I feel in that moment and the energy I give, it'll be appropriate to what I'm going to give, but it won't be a fake, like, let's go. It'll be like, we're doing this right now because we have no other choice.
The drill instructor's in.
Yeah, I guess so. The biggest thing that I'm drawn to is honesty. And if I'm not honest with myself, then I won't attract honest people.
Right.
So if I'm in that moment, if I'm in that space, I stay in that space, and I let it gradually leave, or we gradually grow to the next stage. And 9 times out of 10, that's always in a positive way.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
So
yeah, I mean, because I've definitely been in your classes when you're on cloud 9 and you're just having a good day, and that's very apparent. And then other times when drill instructor Chris comes out.
Yep.
But either way, it's still a great experience, and so it's always impressed me your ability to. I mean, again, you as the performer, everything that's going on.
Yeah.
We as the viewer or the audience, if you will, we only kind of see what you allow us to see.
Absolutely.
And there is that authenticity behind it, yes, but you have this unique ability to be authentic while also, again, from the viewer's standpoint, to also be a performer at the same time, and you've never allowed it to get in the way, which I've always found very impressive with you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't know when I learned this, and I think it was definitely probably in my later 20s, but I learned that authenticity brings like consistency for me. Like,
sure.
Once I learned that being authentic, people around me can feel that from me, and I actually realized it, then I think I applied that to everything in my life as opposed to just saying it. Like, I actually felt it, and then I started being that way in everything I do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's the whole point of this podcast, is just to have those authentic, real conversations and just be honest and transparent with what's going on and how you're feeling, because at the end of the day, that's what's actually happening. You know, I could sit here and create a podcast that is as super fake and motivational and inspiring and, you know, butterflies and rainbows and unicorns and all well and good, but that's not the reality of what I'm going through, and that's certainly not the reality that most people are going through.
Absolutely.
So I completely agree with you in terms of the authenticity. And I want to share one story with everybody that I think... no, I won't get into too much detail, but Chris and I have... Again, we've known each other for a few years now, and I've always had, for years and years and years, I've always had shitty birthdays. For no fault of anybody's, but, you know, my birthday would either land on Father's Day, and therefore, you know, the family was celebrating Father's Day, or it would land on graduations of cousins or birthdays of whatever else it is. My birthday always just kind of fell between the cracks growing up.
Yeah.
And again, it's all good. No fault of anybody's, but you know, when I was out here in California, I had birthdays that I was like, I didn't really know how to celebrate because I don't like being center of attention. So I'm not like, let's have me throw my own birthday party and dinner and all this stuff. And you know, one year Chris came up to me. He's like, "Yo, when's your birthday?" I was like, "Oh, it's actually this weekend," or it was right around the corner.
It was super close.
It was almost there. And he was like, "Well, what are you doing to celebrate?" I'm like, "Oh, dude, I don't have any plans." He's like, that's unacceptable." He's like, "What do you want to do?" I was like, "Well, I've never been to Vegas." He goes, "Fucking A, we're going to Vegas."
Let's go to Vegas.
So we rented a car. Was that the car rental time?
Yep, we rented a car and flew back.
We rented a car, flew back, spur of the moment, just Chris and I. We had no real plans.
Yep. We also got there at 12 o'clock Friday night and flew out 6 a.m. Sunday morning.
Yeah, so we didn't really sleep.
No, probably slept maybe 47 minutes, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. And so we then flew back. I'm throwing up on the flight because I am not only a lightweight, but I just get the worst hangovers.
Yeah.
And we then get back to LA. We get into an Uber. I drop Chris off at SoulCycle. This dude has multiple classes.
3 classes.
3 classes in this one day that he has to teach. One of which is the Survivor. And if you don't know what the Survivor class is, that is, that's the 1 hour class. Every other class is generally 45 minutes. So Chris had at least pretty much 3 hours of intense fitness classes coming up.
Yep.
And I don't know if he was still drunk, but I was still drunk.
Yeah.
And so we dropped you off. You somehow survived and thrived. Whereas by the time the Uber got to my house to drop me off, I just got out of the car in time to throw up on my front yard.
I forgot about that.
I threw up all over my front yard, got into bed, and isolated myself for the rest of the day and slept for God knows how many hours. So again, it just speaks to your professionalism and ability to flip that switch and just somehow pull it off. Because if I were in your shoes at that time, I was either going to get fired or have to call in sick. There was no way I was going to be able to do what you did.
Yeah, no, I'm a big believer of being a man of your word, and obviously that was a commitment I had to do, so I had to get it done. But professionalism, like I had my cup from Vegas pool party that I just filled with water and took that into the class. So
very true.
Depending on who you ask, some people may not call that professional, some would call it professional, you know? So,
but you were still on that bike in the front of the room.
But I was still there doing my job, getting it done.
That's amazing.
That was a good time.
That was a good time. And just for the record, we have had at least 3 or 4 other Vegas trips every year.
That became a tradition after that time. For the next, I think 3 years after that, we went to Vegas every year on your birthday.
And we missed out the past 2 years, obviously.
Because, the world's all
COVID and shit like that. Yeah, everything's fucked. But, it's been fun. Okay, cool. So I want to kind of jump back to your beginning.
Okay.
And really kind of dive into, because this is, a Black History Month special, if you will. And so I really want to take the time and focus on what your experience has been like growing up in America as, a young person of color and now as an adult of color. So I guess the best place to start is the beginning, just like any story, and talk about your childhood. So can you tell me a little bit more about what your childhood was like from the shoes that you were wearing as a young black boy in Philadelphia?
Yeah. So where I grew up actually was very diverse. I went to Catholic school from 1st to 5th grade, St. Helena's. It was in Albany, which is Philly, and very, very diverse. It was like black, white, Puerto Rican.
Was that unique for this school?
No. For this area, that was normal.
Okay.
And then for my later years, we moved to Cheltenham, which is very diverse. And at the time when I was there, I would say it was 50% people of color, so black and brown, and then 50% white. And then as we've grown, like now I think it's like 80% black and brown. I want to say something like that. But while I was there, growing up, I was always around all races. But you kind of felt like at first it was like kind of like the black people stay together, the white people stay together, and then eventually, for my experience, I should say, eventually everything kind of commingles, and it was cool because I was around different cultures growing up, and that obviously helped me in my benefit because I was actually talking on the phone with my friend today, and we used the example of like when we were dating different girls when we were younger. Like for me personally, that interaction with different people helped me understand like different cultures and perspectives.
So when you say you date different girls, you mean different girls of different races?
Yes. No, I didn't mean that, but yes, that as well.
Okay.
I just meant different women in general.
Gotcha.
But yes, that too though. That too.
Okay.
But it just offered a kind of a different perspective and just kind of like just being around different cultures, you know. But in regards to like being a black kid in America, there's things that would happen that I didn't really realize. I think when I was young.
That innocence filter was still there.
Yeah, the innocence filter was still there, and then eventually you would because you would hear people say shit, and then also to me, I'm light skinned, so for the white people that don't know, like as a light skinned black man, all my homies growing up, they'd be like, "Shut your light skinned ass up," or like that's that light skinned shit. Meaning like if you say something like, let's say it's stupid or sensitive, they would be like, "That's that light skinned shit." It's just
because you got a little more white in you.
No, but maybe yes. But then white people also, on the other hand, would be like, "But you're not black." Exactly. So we made a joke when we would hear that. It's like, "Oh wait, but you're not full shit. You're just like half shit." Because essentially that's what that means. And
now, does finding yourself in that situation, I would imagine as a young kid, that's hard to navigate. Because do you feel as though you don't fully belong in any one group?
For me personally, not really, because I think I've been confident enough to acknowledge like my presence in places, you know. Sure. But in essence, yes, absolutely, it makes it hard or tough for some people, especially for light-skinned people, to like know, I guess, which side you should go to. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, but me personally, I always say I grew up culturally black. I was always like black shit. I guess people what's like he did black things, or like he listened to black music, or like that's the type category.
So what's a black thing? Like I would imagine music would be more hip hop, rap,
yes,
R&B type of stuff. Though you have people of color in all genres across the board, but from a very generic standpoint, that's the categorization I would imagine you're just describing.
Yes.
But what's a black thing?
I think what you just said is what we should keep it at. Like a black thing, I don't know if I can really describe a black thing, because I also don't like the term of like you speak white or you speak black or anything like that. I just feel like it's weird generalizations that aren't real.
Right.
You know, like that's like
it's a stereotype.
It's a stereotype, yes. Yeah. It's stereotypical black or stereotypical white. It's not necessarily a thing that I can say. It's just like stereotypical shit.
Sure, absolutely. So I know another thing that happens. Certainly something I have never and will never experience, nor will my children ever experience. Possibly, jury's still out, I guess. I don't know who I'm going to marry, but
get you a sister.
But there is a thing called the talk, and that all young people, I would imagine primarily men, young boys of color, receive. And it's not the sex talk. It's not the birds and the bees. What is this talk? And tell us about that generally, and then tell me about your experience receiving this talk and kind of how, if at all, that kind of changed your world from that point on.
And when you say talk, I'm assuming you mean like the talk your parents had with you, like in relation to like cops.
Yeah. To the best of my knowledge.
Yes. The one thing I could always remember my mom saying to me is to keep your things concealed. And if you, let's say it's driving era, and my dad was like, if you get stopped by the cops, make sure you always keep your hands where they can see you. If they ask you for something, make sure you like re-say, so like, officer, I'm reaching for my registration, or officer, I'm not moving too quickly. The biggest thing though I could say talk-wise is that they would definitely tell me to not talk back, and don't give them any reason to assume the worst of you. If like you get pulled over, or if you have any way with them. The best story I can give, there was one time me and all my friends, we were probably in 11th grade, and it was like 10:30 p.m. We were outside my house throwing football around, and I lived right next door to a pizza store. So the cops came. Somebody called the cops saying we were trying to break into the pizza store.
When you're throwing a football?
And we were throwing a football. So,
Jesus.
The cops come over to us. They start questioning us, asking for our ID, said we're not allowed to throw the football right there. And then it was cold outside. It was in Philly. And I remember my friends were like, hand me my jacket. And I was like, no, don't do that. And he's like, all right. But then eventually they asked again, and I saw the cop like put his hand on his gun.
Because someone went reaching for anything.
Yeah, because they saw that we could potentially be reaching for anything. Yeah. And then eventually the cop was like, stop fucking around. You go get a jacket, put the jacket on. Like, he said something like that. And then we all just stopped. And then we gave the IDs. They told us to go in the house, and that was it. But again, it was literally outside of my house playing football. And
you had the ID to prove that you lived right there.
Yeah, it was right there.
It just didn't matter.
It doesn't matter. So yeah, the talk with my parents is just, you don't really know it as that then when it's happening. So yeah, like the be safe and don't talk back and don't give them a reason, and like hearing that every time you leave the house.
But is it, again, not knowing, just from watching the news and hearing other interviews and so forth about this talk.
Yeah.
Yes, it is about police officers and how to interact with them and protect yourself, just from a generic standpoint. Not saying all cops are out there that are bad. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But there is that extra added level of stress that if you are a person of color,
yes, you
are having to deal with when interacting with someone of law enforcement that I, again, don't have. It's white privilege, plain and simple.
Yeah.
But there's also something to, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also something to the fact that it can just be you walking into a store and the store owner following you around thinking you're going to shoplift. Yeah. Or you walking around with a hoodie on when you, quote unquote, look suspicious now, and you're just walking down the street minding your own business. Mm-hmm. Is that stuff that also is part of your conversation as well, or is that stuff that you just kind of picked up on living your day-to-day life?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both. Unfortunately, that's just one of those things that I guess it's hard thinking about it because I can't pinpoint the beginning of when that happens, but I now know whenever I'm walking into a space, especially a predominantly white space, that I need to be aware of that behavior, or be aware of somebody perceiving me that way, or be aware that somebody will call the cops because they say me and my friends might be robbing a place, or think that we're up to something when we are just, there. So yeah.
I mean, that can't be easy. I mean, everything that you do, it's like the police songs, like every step you take, someone's watching you. It's the idea that you can't just live your life comfortably, especially when you're in a situation that is, in an area that is more, white based or another ethnicity other than, people of the same race.
This is what I'll say right here, and it's I think some people definitely disagree, but it's hard not to feel that every older white person that was born like in the 60s or before will not be discriminatory towards you. Just because of history, for one. Mm-hmm. Being alive during a time where discrimination was normal,
Yeah, so how they were raised.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and then those values being passed down to their children or children's children until the cycle is broken, if ever. Mm-hmm. So, easy? No, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's one of those things. It's just like I said, if I'm tired, I'm about to teach a class. It's one of those things that it's there. And it's like, it's always been there. So I can either run from it or I can keep walking forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how does that must have some type of toll on your mental state, right? I mean, it's got to be exhausting always having to, not just live your life, but also think about how all those other people around you are perceiving your simple everyday actions.
Absolutely, it does. And I would say in recent years, especially the older I get and as I grow, it makes me more nervous because, especially with like the state of the world within the last administration and stuff, it made me nervous around certain like groups of people, especially if like it was a large group of white people. And again, not to say all white people are bad, because obviously they aren't. Like, all cops aren't bad. But when you, just like how those people can perceive a black person for walking into a space, as the black person, it makes me feel like you would perceive, it makes me assume that you see me this way, that I've heard this group of people have seen me before, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it's definitely like a weight.
Which is categorizing you with every other
that
possible person of color out there.
Yes.
And I mean that's like the definition of just racist and just...
Absolutely. I mean, I think generalizations are the worst shit ever. I think is terrible because every person is different. There was an interview of it was Killer Mike, who's a rapper. He has a show on Netflix, but he was talking to this elderly white woman, and they were talking about who they think is, like, I don't want to say bad, but she essentially said that black people rape and murder more, and then he was essentially saying that how white young men had mass like murders more. So it was a very interesting conversation of like a 30 plus. A mid-30s black man and like a 90-year-old white woman. But the reason why I bring it up is he said he feels the way this would be healed is for white people to speak to more black people and for black people to speak to more white people, essentially. Like, actually get to know them, learn their life experiences.
What a concept.
I know, right? Could you imagine?
Talking to another human being and having a conversation that's more than just about the weather.
Who knows if I don't know.
Well, I mean, again, like that's what this is all about, and that's why I'm so stoked to have you on today's show, because it's such a simple concept. The idea of having an in-depth, meaningful conversation with another human being, but it doesn't happen nearly as much as it needs to, especially across racial, borders and divides.
Absolutely.
And with the world, I mean, you touched on it, with the world that we're currently living in, with how divisive it is.
Yeah.
I mean, we're so far past the point of no return that the only way to actually get something done is by going to the basics, and is basically restarting. And how do you do that? Okay, well, it's talking to another person and seeing who they are and what they're actually about, instead of just being like, okay, that's the color of their skin, or that's where they were born and raised, that's the zip code that they're from, or that's the accent that they have, so therefore I'm going to just drop them into this category pool and be done with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's the laziest means of going about your life.
And the internet makes it worse. When I was younger, we would be walking home from somewhere. It would be, let's say it was nighttime. There's been multiple occasions where a group of white kids would drive by and they would yell "nigger" out the car to us as we were walking past, right? And I think now that's the equivalent to people on the internet saying hateful shit behind their phone screen to people that they don't know.
Keyboard cowards.
Keyboard cowards, exactly.
Yeah.
So like they can stand behind, you know, that protective screen of theirs because they obviously aren't face to face. But the conversations when you actually speak to somebody in person. I just trained somebody and she called me on my birthday and I was like, you're one of the few people that actually called me, you know. And I appreciate all calls, texts, DMs, whatever it is. But
for the record, I did not call, so Chris is trying to call me out right now.
You got me. That's why I showed up today.
I think I texted you though.
No, you did. You showed love.
Yeah.
But I bring it up because like we don't have that type of interaction much anymore. And when we were younger, we would have never guessed that would have been like an old thing to do now, you know?
Well, you know, I think a perfect way to kind of break it down is phone calls today are what like walking up and knocking on someone's door used to be.
Absolutely.
Like it used to be like when I was growing up, like I was fortunate enough to be born in like, you know, the suburbs where you can leave your bikes out on the front yard and you didn't have to worry about them getting stolen. Front doors were left unlocked. You could just walk up to your friend's house or your neighbors would walk over, knock on the door. Yeah. They just come in, get entertained, have a glass of wine, whatever it is, by, you know, the parents to parents and what have you. And then it's just, oh, great, you stopped by? Yeah, come on in. Mm-hmm. That does not happen anymore. I mean, the first reaction that anybody has nowadays, if someone knocks on the door, is like, who's that? Yeah. If they're not expecting delivery from Amazon, UPS, or FedEx, they're like, someone's trying to break into my house. Yeah. And then back then, you know, phone calls were cool. Yeah. Like they were normal. That's all you would do. Yeah. Because texting wasn't so normalized.
It wasn't even invented yet.
And yeah, exactly. And that's putting some age on it. But now it's like, I mean, I've literally dated girls for not that long, but I've had relationships where a phone call just never happened. Yeah. We'd be texting. I'd be like, hey, can I call you? They'd be like, oh, let's just text. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Yeah. Like, this is the weirdest thing. But yeah, no, I completely agree. I think we just have to go back to the basics of talking to each other, having real meaningful conversation, and getting past this, oh, they look like that, okay, then we're probably not going to get along. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, as human beings, we have so much more in common with each other than we have not in common with each other.
Absolutely.
And whether it be mental health or, you know, anything about having to do with, you know, whether it be politics or economic status, or it doesn't matter what it is. Yeah. There are so many things that tie us together and can bring us together if we just give it the chance. And yeah, I mean, again, that's what this is all about, is having those types of conversations. And I mean, you touched on it, like that drive-by, that horrendous type of act that somebody can, you know, partake in, of driving by, throwing a word out there that to them is just, you know, it's clearly, you know, nurtured in hate. Yeah. But being on the receiving end of that, what is that experience like? Like, how does it make you feel, and how do you not only deal with it in the moment, but also deal with it after the fact? Because, like, I'm sure it sticks with you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I can still remember their faces, you know? And, again, it's not like it's happened one time. It happened multiple times, more than one occasion, from different people.
I would imagine.
You know? So, but the way it feels is exactly how you would think it would feel. Like, the worst, like, it's, for one, there's nothing you can do because they're gone. Yeah. You know, it makes you...
So there's no sense of justice anything like that?
It makes you upset at other white people, unfortunately, because it just makes you feel like this is how you view me, or like feels like somebody's spitting on you, or somebody just views you as the lowest form, I guess. But in the same breath, for me, it makes me feel like you're going to see, like, watch what I do type situation. Like, you perceive me this way, how stupid of you to look at me this way. I'll show you better than I can tell you.
Absolutely.
Which I don't know if it's, well, I know it's definitely a pro. I think it's a con to it as well. But for me, it made me more of a fighter. You know,
I would imagine.
Just knowing that you're viewed in such a low way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think there's, when you're faced with a horrible situation, you have two choices. You are forced to have this fork in the road in your life, and it's like, okay, well, do I take a right and turn into a positive, whether it's fuel of saying, you know what, I'm going to prove you, and that gives you that much more fuel and energy to succeed in whatever it is that you're pursuing.
Yeah.
Or you take the left road and you allow them to, really convince you of, how they perceive you as actually accurate. And all that's going to do is prove them right. I mean,
exactly.
To an extent, I want to say that very loosely, but the idea of you're only going to amount to so much, and if you let that keep knocking you down, and you don't get back up to prove them wrong, then it doesn't do you any good.
But also, it also makes me think of the people before me in my time, for the people that, when there were colored only restrooms and not being allowed to use the same toilet as a white person. It makes me think of those people that had to endure that. So obviously what happened to me should not have happened, but for them to have to experience that and get through it and be further from that, to me, is proof that I also have to get through it and keep it pushing further than even that point of my life.
Absolutely. That makes total sense.
So.
And I got a one-off question just because you brought that up. Who's your role model? Who's your black icon?
Yeah, I mean, other than my dad's the shit. But like, if I had to choose an icon, like let's say a famous one, Kobe Bryant for sure. I mean, I'm from Philly. Kobe Bryant's from Philly too, but he played for the Lakers, so I was a fan of Kobe Bryant during the Allen Iverson era, when Allen Iverson played for the Sixers and Kobe played for the Lakers, and they were in the finals together. And I remember wearing my Lakers jersey to school. That was the wrong move. That was the wrong move.
Because you were in Philly.
Because I was in Philly.
Yeah.
And then Allen Iverson is also one of the GOATs, So like that era was, but again, Kobe he just always been that one person for me that I just, and for a lot of people obviously, that just made me, I just love to watch him, make me feel like I can do anything, that I can push myself, and knowing he was 17, went straight to the league. But yeah, man, and yeah, historical figure wise too. I mean, obviously like Martin Luther King,
Okay. All right. I mean, you got some good ones in there. You got Kobe, you got your dad, you got MLK.
It's got Kobe, dad, MLK.
So you're checking off all the right boxes. All right. I mean, you touched on what generations before you have endured between segregation and so forth. What, in your opinion, based on your experience in the state of the world, from the shoes that you're wearing, what do you think is necessary in order to actually create lasting change? What steps would you like to actually see taken?
When you say steps, do you mean like from a black person to a white person, or like just in general as
just
a black person?
From a society standpoint, but that can absolutely mean from like what can the black and brown community do to extend a hand, but at the same time it's a two-way street. What can someone like myself, someone who's white, what can the white community do to extend a hand and really kind of meet you guys halfway?
I think
we all have to do this together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing as a white person is to not just assume that like your token black friend can just give you all the answers type thing. And I'm not saying this you at all by any means, but I've in recent times, especially like with the George Floyd stuff and everything happening, I feel like what happened was that white people started reaching out, like saying they're sorry or what can I do to help, and it's all well and good, but what I would say is like what you can do to help is educate yourself also separately on how things got to where they are today. You know, like the history of the world or the history of Black America, and not just assume that like your Black friend can just give you all the answers.
I think that's a very important point to make
Yeah.
because, again, that is within its own sense categorizing one person to represent an entire group of people.
Exactly.
And that's like me speaking for all the white people on the planet, which I do not do. I
Exactly.
speak for me.
Exactly.
And only me. And therefore you for only you.
Exactly.
But with that said, I do think that there's something to learning about your specific experience
Absolutely.
that can shine more of a light for me to know what it's like. Therefore, I can be that much more empathetic to everybody else I encounter and that much more willing and eager to educate myself based on what I've already learned from you as kind of like the spark to kind of light everything.
I mean, somebody like you again, you have friends from all walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the number one thing I think anyone could do. Like if you're only in one box, if you're only around one culture, how are you going to grow? So I think exposing yourself to different cultures is the easiest thing you can do. Well, I mean, I guess depending on where you live, I don't know how diverse everyone's hometowns are wherever you live, but from the outside looking in and just from experiencing it, being around all types of people. That's easily to be the number one, to be able to understand people. And like you said, we all have similarities. We're all a lot more alike than people understand.
Yeah.
Regardless of religion or politics.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, for those out there that are living in a very, you know, secular community, you know, I grew up in a very white community. There was some diversity, certainly, but I didn't experience that much diversity in my educational career in school, which is a child's universe pretty much growing up, and really until I got to high school. I mean, yes, there were absolutely all races that kind of sprinkled throughout my elementary, middle school careers, but generally speaking, it wasn't really blatantly in my face diverse until I got to high school.
Yeah.
And that opened me up to an entire world of people, and I made such good friends with so many people from all different backgrounds, and it was just one of those moments where it's like, I felt weird because I went into high school thinking that this was going to be a little different now, and I didn't know how to not accept it, but how to go about it.
Yeah.
Because it was new to me.
Yeah.
But the second you talk to someone just as a human being, and you look past the color of their skin because it doesn't matter, you realize it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it's so simple. It's such a simplistic concept, but for so many people, it's so hard to get past.
Absolutely.
And
because of the exterior. And like me personally, that's one of my favorite things about speaking to different cultures is like learning new slang or learning how they communicate with their family or how they speak, how they walk, how they grew up. Like to me, that's one of my favorite things to learn.
Yeah.
Because you just learn more about that people, you learn more about that culture, and it cultures me more.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, and that only, the more you educate yourself on whatever the topic may be, the better you're going to be as a person.
Yeah.
The more well-rounded, the more educated, the more respected and respectful you're going to be. And, you know, again, for those out there that do live in a very, you know, one race type of community, you know, not now because of COVID and so forth, but traveling is a great way to make up for that.
absolutely.
You know, even if it's taking a day trip into your closest city and going to experience a new restaurant, that's, you know, different than anything you've ever tried before. Absolutely. Or going out of the country to an island, or it doesn't matter. Just putting yourself in a new situation to meet new people is super important. I mean, you know, you talked about having such diverse friends. Do you ever find as though when you are hanging out with, say, myself and other white friends of yours, that there are things that you shy away from discussing or sharing that you would be more open about with your fellow, black friends or something like that?
Yes, but it's not really a white friends thing. I think it's more so a specific person.
Okay.
But it's just a specific person, and definitely it does happen to be white people that are that specific person. But again, like you compared to another white friend, I won't like say names, but I could think of somebody right now who's I would definitely may be reluctant to say something in a certain way because of how that person may respond.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to somebody with you, I feel like we can have a very open conversation about current events or, any world problems or problems that the black community are facing right now. And I feel like it would be a very thorough conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yes and no is the answer.
Okay, for sure. Absolutely. That makes total sense. I mean, and the reason I ask is because, like, again, for me, I've never really found myself in that situation, but there has been times where I might be more hesitant to ask a certain question.
Yeah.
If I'm hanging out with you and other, black people, just out of fear of being disrespectful, out of pure ignorance.
Do you have an example of a question? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Well, you just did. Because I don't off the top of my head, in all honesty.
Uh-huh.
I mean, one thing that I've always wanted to ask you about, which I got the chance to today, which I'm very fortunate about, but asking you about the talk.
Oh, yeah.
Because, that is, I hear that's such a pivotal moment. And, you're such a good friend of mine, and that I haven't yet heard your take on that.
No, I think that's a great example. And I think that's one thing that, like you said, you didn't even know was a thing,
Right.
Like you didn't know. So I think that's a great, and every person's like conversation that they have with their parents or siblings or whoever it may be is different.
Of course.
So yeah, I think that's a great example.
Yeah, but I was just always worried that, like, if you're just hanging out, like, it's not a question, you're just like, well, there's an ounce of dead silence here, so I'm gonna be like, Chris, tell me about your talk. Like, everyone's gonna throw that out there, but I also didn't want to just
take a shot of whiskey. Like, what's it like being black?
Yeah, exactly. I was just always worried of coming off insensitive
Absolutely.
or ignorant, out of, again, pure ignorance and just not knowing, when clearly that was not my intention.
Yeah.
But and I think for so many people out there that do find those moments where you want to ask a question to be more informed and educated, but you're a little hesitant for whatever the reason may be. I mean, I think, I encourage you to kind of go out of your way and find an appropriate moment to ask that question in maybe in a more private setting, or just in a way that, you can prove that, hey, I'm not trying to be rude or ignorant. I'm just trying to better understand your perspective on a topic.
No, I think the best way you learn is to ask, right? So
Right.
I absolutely agree with that. When you whether it's finding a time or not, like, ask the question. Do you have a question? Ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if it's a good spirited question and it's not like an underlying racist tone. Like
Right.
if you genuinely want to know something and it's your friend, ask them the question.
Absolutely. And I think that also kind of goes back to how can both sides, and sides is a silly way to put it, but for the terms of this conversation, how can two people meet each other halfway?
Yeah.
Is if I'm a white guy building up the courage to ask a question because I genuinely want to know and I'm curious to learn more about your experiences, you on the receiving end, and I'm not saying you specifically, Chris, but the person on the receiving end hopefully will welcome those types of questions and not meet it with like wait, what the fuck did you just ask me?
Absolutely.
Like where's this coming from?
A good story I have that's kind of similar to this is my girlfriend, who is she's white and has Lebanese in her daughter is half Filipino. So when the whole George Floyd thing happened, she essentially didn't understand. She was asking a bunch of questions and like, why did it happen? Why did the cops kill him? All that. And her mom tried her best way to like say what happened, but then eventually the question led to, she calls me Kristen. She was like, so can that happen to Kristen? And like just off her own,
she
connected the dots. She connected the dots, exactly. And that's like, it's such a powerful moment, and for like a kid to see that and think of that, it just made me like sad for her to have that thought or like that realization, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember she asked once why it happened, and I tried my best to answer it. Like, people are scared, and people do things when they're scared, or lack of culture, lack of experiences, lack of empathy because they've never been around that crowd. Lack of training. Yeah, we can go into a whole conversation about that separately, but
yeah.
It's it broke my heart to hear that question. But in the same breath of asking questions, as kids do, they ask questions, and as adults, we can relearn that is one of the greatest ways for us to learn. To ask the question.
Absolutely, and not be afraid to give an honest answer.
Yes, being open.
Yeah, and especially with children, as heartbreaking as the fact that she even had to ask that question is, you would have been doing a disservice to her, in the short term, but a disservice nonetheless if you were to kind of try to candy coat it and sugarcoat your answer, your response to her.
Absolutely.
And I think everything you said, was spot on. Like, yes, it's usually not just one answer.
Yeah.
It's a lifetime of lack of this, lack of that.
Yeah.
Blended all together into these few seconds, or in George Floyd's case, a few minutes.
Yeah.
And it all bottled up into that moment.
Yeah.
But when you have other shootings, George Floyd was a very unique situation with the knee on the neck.
Yeah.
But when you have a shooting, I mean, it's seconds.
Yeah.
And so everything just kind of compiles into those few moments, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of kids, what would you, knowing everything that you know now, what would you want to tell your younger self? If you can go back to any age of a young Chris P., what age would that be, and what would you want to tell him?
I always say 16. I would go back to my 16-year-old self.
Why 16?
I always say I would tell my 16-year-old self this, so that's one of the reasons why. But also 16, because I didn't go to kindergarten, so I was a grade ahead in school. So when I was 16, I was in 12th grade.
Okay.
So, and I remember feeling like, because I was the youngest, I always had to prove myself that I can do it still. I was always the youngest and the smallest person. So I always felt like I had to prove myself that I'm smart enough to do it, or I'm strong enough to do it. So I would go back and tell my 16-year-old self, like, 1, we did it, and 2, stop worrying so much about trying to show people that you're good enough, because you are way stronger than you are giving yourself credit for. And if you keep doing exactly what you're doing, everything you want is going to happen.
I love that.
Yeah.
What I guess kind of my last question for you would be...
Oh, and pay your student loans. I would say that.
Pay your student loans.
Yeah.
Get on that. That's good. Because that'll come bite you in the ass.
Yeah, I would say that.
You can't get away from those. What is your why in life? And I'm sure your answer would have developed over the years, but where you are currently at 31 years old, you have a successful relationship with someone out of state, which is never an easy thing to begin with.
Yeah.
She has a daughter, which is, obviously something new to you.
Yeah.
Being more of a parenting figure in this relationship as well. So you're taking on more than just the responsibility of a significant other. What is your why now in life? What gets you up in the morning, and what motivates you to continue to be as motivated, as successful, and as optimistic and positive as you are every single day?
That's a great question, Bradley.
Thank you. I'm working on this whole interview thing.
That's a great question. My why, especially now being in a relationship with someone with a daughter, and leaving my hometown to start a brand new life in California, and being a person that went to school, didn't necessarily do well in school, My why now is to, I mean, if I had to make it super black and white, is to get up and be the best person you can do, because I have to lead by example for myself, for one, because again, it used to be me proving it to everybody else, but now it's me proving it to myself that I can do it. So for one, as the stages of life goes by, of buying a house and getting married and having children, I want to make sure that financially, emotionally, that I am strong enough to handle those things. So that's a big factor, whether it's for my relationship or whether it's for my family. The thought of me being able to take care of them all is a big motivating factor, whether it is financially or it is emotional. And that is a big driving force for me. And it's just to get up and put one foot in front of the next one, and acknowledging that things don't happen overnight, and enjoying this process as I continue to walk my path.
And figure out what that path is.
Exactly.
It's always changing.
And that's exactly right. Learning as I go. Because I think when I was in my early 20s, I assumed I knew everything, as people in their early 20s do.
Right.
You know? But now, knowing that I don't, now accepting that I don't know everything, and being open to listen to what's around me, everything just grows.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I mean, for me, I went from thinking I know everything, or, knowing I know everything.
Yes.
To realizing I know nothing.
Yep.
And immediately it was a terrifying thing, because I was like, I'm literally growing up and living a life as I'm just flailing through it, not knowing what I'm doing, what I'm all about, what I stand for, what I even want to do, what my passions are, and all this stuff. And I think you touched on it beautifully, which is stop trying to prove all this stuff to other people.
Yep.
And just focus on proving to yourself that you can do whatever you want to do, as long as you continuously put one foot in front of the other.
Exactly.
And are better tomorrow than you were today.
And most importantly is to love yourself. And that's the cheesiest thing you can say, but it's the truest thing.
And it's also one of the hardest things to do.
It's the hardest things to do. Me, and I mean this with love, I feel like we're always the hardest on ourselves versus anyone else.
100%.
So I think if we can just cut ourselves a little bit of slack and really just take a step back and evaluate where you are, I think you would acknowledge that you're doing a little bit better than you were the day before.
How do you love yourself?
Oh, I tell myself I'm the shit all the time.
Okay then.
But and like I do though.
Words of affirmation.
I'm a big believer.
Self-talk. Yep.
Like in class, I'll randomly say, "Tell yourself the best about yourself." I'm a big believer of manifestation, of what you say. You are what you say you are.
Mm-hmm.
So if you notice some negative talk about yourself, if you notice that you're saying things that can just, they're not positive things that uplift you, or you're always being self-deprecating. Mm-hmm. Those things manifest in your thoughts, and you tend to do that in everything you do.
And those thoughts create your reality, and that reality then attracts those types of people.
Exactly.
To continuously reaffirm those.
And it's been happening for X amount of time.
It's a nasty cycle.
So tell yourself the best about yourself. Do it over and over again.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to go all Tony Robbins on people, but I feel like
he's a pretty smart guy.
He's pretty smart. He's great. Look how successful he is off of what what I'm saying.
He's killing it.
he's killing it. But yeah, man, like, tell yourself the best about yourself. Yell it in the mirror, or yell it while you're driving.
Is that what you would tell this young girl that you are now a parenting figure in your relationship with your girlfriend? Is that what you would want, the advice that you would tell her, or would you have a different type of advice for her being a young girl growing into a young woman?
Oh no, that's definitely the advice I would give.
Okay.
Yep. Tell yourself the best about yourself, and if you need help, I'll help you say it.
For sure. Awesome, man. Well, you know, I've said this in the beginning, but out of all the years we've known each other, we've had some real conversations, but a lot of what we've just been covering, we've never really touched on.
Yeah.
And I think that just goes to show that you can be very close with somebody and know somebody for an extended period of time and still not have those next layer in-depth conversations that are just so important to just, again, get a better idea of who that person is.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you so much for joining me today and giving the listeners a real treat.
I appreciate you, man. Always my brother. Happy I was able to come and talk to you, man.
Absolutely. All right, well, that does it for today's episode. Thank you to my wonderful guest, Mr. Christopher Pipkin, and to each and all of you for joining me and Chris for this important conversation focused around Black mental health. Together we can and we will make a difference. Before I share my top story from last week about how I went ahead and did one nice deed per day, I want to share some exciting news, which is in the next 2 weeks, I will no longer be calling Los Angeles home, and I will be moving back east to be closer to my family and have a new adventure, a new chapter for my life, which I am very excited about, but at the same time, I am a bit nervous because it's new. But due to the craziness of moving, I want to let it be known that I am going to be taking the next few weeks off, and therefore episode 4 will be airing on Sunday, March 28th. So almost a full month off just so I can get settled and so forth. In the meantime, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share the first 3 episodes of A Grown Man's Diary with your family and friends to really help us bring these important conversations into more households as well as headphones. All right, so time to share my favorite story from last week. So in my nice neighborhood in Manhattan Beach, California, I was walking my dog, and there's this one household who each day puts out a water bowl, a jar of dog treats, and a bucket with a sign that says, throw your dog's poop bags here, and we'll take care of that for you. I saw the dad outside the house playing with his son, and I just took a second, though I did hesitate. I decided this is, I owed it to you guys, and I owed it to myself to do this. So, but again, it just shows I got nervous about it because it is a little strange sometimes, especially, during a pandemic. But I approached him when he was playing outside with his son, and I just took a second to be like, hey, I really appreciate what you and your family are doing in terms of putting everything out. It's a great neighbor move. So thank you so much. And the way he responded was very surprising because he was so thrilled that I was saying thank you because, he gave his wife full credit for everything. And he was saying that, oh my God, thank you so much. I'll be sure to tell my wife because she will love to hear that, someone said thank you because she's been doing this for a long time and no one's ever said thank you to her or to them as a household. And so, at the end of all of it, based on his reaction, you would think that I did something for him and his family when it was really just the complete opposite of just how grateful he was. So I thought that was really cool. And it just kind of goes to show how the simplest of gestures can really make all the difference. I know that I left that interaction feeling genuinely happier and better, and I know this man did as well. And soon his wife was going to feel better all the same, just, after he went ahead and told her. So it took a few seconds to really allow 3 people to feel better for the rest of the day. And that's pretty cool. So please be sure to, if you guys have any stories from this past week that you think I would like to hear, either message below or message me privately. And I'd love to hear about your experience doing one good deed per day. All right, well, thanks again for tuning in today, and I will see you guys from a new location back east on Sunday, March 28th. Take care till then.